to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Tuesday, January 14th, 1941. Henry Chopp reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:16 a.m. It set at 4:43 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, cloudy Tuesday and Wednesday with occasional light snow or freezing rain. Not much change in temperature. A moderate to fresh easterly winds. The low temperature, 30 degrees. The high temperature, 35. Today's headline, Modify Stand-on War Bill. Washington, D.C., January 13th. Seeking to quell the storm of protest at the dictatorship features of President Roosevelt's bill to supply unlimited arms and munitions to Great Britain, Greece, and China, administration leaders today opened the way to modify amendments. Speaker Sam Rayburn, Democrat Texas, said he certainly wouldn't oppose a time limitation on the enormous powers the bill proposes to grant the president if the limit ran concurrently with the emergency. As to setting a definite time, such as 90 days or 6 months or some other specified period, he said, that's another matter. Representative John W. McCormick, Democrat, Massachusetts, Majority Leader of the House, said that some suggestions for amendment of the bill have been from the constructive angle and broadly intimated that the administration forces are ready to make concessions to the opponents of the unlimited grant of warmongering powers to the executive. Senator Walter F. George, Democrat, Georgia, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said that while he unqualifiedly approves the objective of the proposed legislation, he ventured the opinion that the president would not object to an amendment providing that reasonable security be given by the borrowers of armament. Such security, he said, might take the form of goods needed by the United States, such as tin and rubber. American interests negotiating for the purpose of direct British investments in the United States properties may total $850 million. The Senate committee will decide on Wednesday whether to begin consideration of the measure at once or await action by the House, the Foreign Affairs Committee of which will open hearings on it on Wednesday. Non-interventionist members of the Senate committee will contend for the regular order, which would be to await receipt of the bill from the House. The Republican and Democratic non-interventionists will have a bipartisan leadership in the Senate battle. Senator Burton K. Wheeler of Montana, who led the successful fight against Mr. Roosevelt's scheme to pack the Supreme Court, has been chosen as the Democratic co-leader. The Republicans will pick either Senator Arthur H. Vandenberg of Michigan or Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio. Representative Saul Bloom, Democrat, New York, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, announced the beginning of hearings on Wednesday. The first witnesses are to include Secretary of State Cordell Hull, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, and Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau, Jr. Bloom plans to rush the hearings to completion in 3 days and report the bill to the House for action the first of next week. Representative Kenneth F. Simpson, Republican, New York, introduced in the House a revised version of the administration bill differing from the president's measure in only two particulars. It would limit the grant of power to 2 years, and it would confine the loans immediately made to the British Commonwealth of Nations and Ireland. Loans could be made to other nations only by concurrent resolution of Congress. The Simpson bill represents the views of Wendell Willkie, with whom the New York congressman said he had conferred by telephone before offering the revised draft of the administration measure. And now for world news. On the Greek-Albanian frontier, January 11th delayed. Advances in the last 4 days have given Greek troops control of the important and strategic crossroads at Klissura. One road leads to Berat, one of Albania's most important road centers. I have just returned from a tour with the mountaineer troops. I saw the tremendous difficulties they overcame and the skillful way in which they drove the Italians from the ridges into the valleys and leave them no choice except to retreat up the valleys or be cut off by flank attacks. At the most advanced point on the road where the car could go, I left it in a gully, well covered with branches as the Greeks do with all vehicles on the roadside. From there, we climbed 1,600 feet in a mile and a half to the mountain village where the commander had his headquarters. To reach the fighting front meant another 2.5 hours of scrambling and slithering up slopes. A week earlier, the Greeks had fought their way up these same slopes against machine guns, mortars, and grenades to a height of 3,000 feet. When we took a shortcut over a projecting ridge, we found dead Italian machine gunners, which the burial parties had not yet discovered among the underbrush. They were lying among scattered ammunition clips and grenades, which they had no time to use. The path winding around the mountainside was trodden into a quagmire. Mud which came halfway up our calves seemed to be semi-liquid until we tried to lift our feet and found them firmly gripped. Every step is an effort. That is the kind of terrain where we saw Greek troops charging uphill to sweep aside mortars and machine guns on ridge after ridge, with rockets soaring to announce each successive goal reached. Up those same trails, the patient mules plod constantly with provisions and ammunition to keep the fight moving. Reaching the front line means a rest for observers. The men who move up with them are merely starting the worst of the day's advance. They attack before daylight under artillery barrage and take full advantage of the half-light to terrorize the Italians. The battle opens with the roar of heavy artillery hidden back in the valleys, hurling its shells overhead, and lighter guns barking from positions closer up. Lower down the ridge, the infantry moves forward to the trees. Flashes of red fire among the trees, followed by puffs of smoke, show where they are charging Italian mortars. You can see the mortar fire increasing and hear the constant tapping of machine guns. Our guns fire quick bursts, a Greek said. You could tell the Italians by their slower and steadier beat. On the near side of a lower ridge, you can see a Greek crew firing a captured Italian mortar, lobbing 3-inch mortar bombs over the ridge. Scattered Italians in green uniforms appear in a clearing. At the top side of the opposite ridge, they run together for a moment. Then, as Greek khaki-clad figures appear across the clearing, they give up the sight. The green figures fall into line and file off into the woods. A few minutes later, they appear on the path below, shuffling along, carrying a few wounded and guarded by a couple of Greek soldiers. As the morning mists clear away, planes appear, enemy aircraft. As long as visibility permits, they come over in waves, strewing light bombs across the ridges and valleys where they think the Greeks are, and painting occasional salvos of heavy bombs over what they hope are artillery positions. It is a nasty feeling to watch a shower of bombs pouring out of an airplane which you feel is just about in position to hit you. Another few seconds and they will be overhead and beyond hitting you. The Greek officers ignore them. Sit still and don't worry about them is their motto. When you are with Greek officers, you have to do the same and pretend you have no desire to flop in the bottom of the trench. When they get through bombing, they sweep down just below range of anti-aircraft and machine guns to spatter the road with machine gun fire. Airplanes don't seem to halt the Greek advance, nor even slow it perceptibly. The Greeks push doggedly on over ridges and somehow get their guns up there with them. Coming back after the battle, you see the price and the helpless and wounded men journeying down the mountainside in silent agony, except when some unusual jolt rests a long, low moan from one of them. Those who cannot sit up cling on the backs of pack mules. The others lie on stretchers carried by 4 comrades who, despite their best efforts, slip and stumble into the greasy mud and against the rocks lying in it. Along the road you see them again. The bad cases are in ambulances rolling as slowly as possible over the ruts. Other cases, who by all normal standards should be in there, are walking to make room for those worse off. A boy with both feet frostbitten hobbles along on two sticks. Another with his head bandaged leans on the shoulder of a comrade. There is nothing wrong with their spirit. Athens, January 13th. Greek soldiers reporting scant resistance stabbed deeper into Italian defense positions south of Valona today, and Greek spokesmen expressed a belief this might prove the greatest offensive of the war in Albania. Although they claimed fascist lines were crumbling at some points, authorities in Athens still lacked confirmation of reports from the Yugoslav frontier that Tepelini, fortified mountain town guarding an Italian-built highway to the port of Valona, had fallen. Capture of Tepelini would give the Greeks a jumping-off place for a renewed thrust toward Valona, sole southern Albania port remaining in Italian hands. A companion drive northward along the coast was said to have brought the Greeks within 30 miles of Valona. New gains were claimed also for forces which swept on northward from Klissura, a strategic central front point taken last week. In the Belgrade sector, where bitter hand-to-hand fighting was reported, the Greeks claimed capture of many pack mules and resultant menace to fascist supply lines. They contended the Italians would be unable to bring up more pack mules through snowbound mountain passes. A government spokesman said the Italians had strengthened their lines with reserves ported to Albania by sea and air, but that news from the front showed the situation as very satisfactory for the Greeks. More prisoners and many abandoned Italian wounded men were captured by Greek patrols, he added. Italian wounded and prisoners belong mostly to troops sent to Albania recently by ship and plane, the spokesman said. Cairo, Egypt, January 13th. Royal Air Force squadrons ranging far ahead of General Sir Archibald Wavell's land forces have gained control of the air as far as Benghazi, or over a third of Italy's North African colony, British sources said tonight. A string of airdromes and landing fields in the vicinity of beleaguered Tobruk were abandoned so speedily by the Italians that they had no time to destroy them, the British said. RAF flyers were said already to be using these fields as bases for heavy attacks on Tobruk, like those credited with playing a major role in the fall of Bardia. The British say that General Wavell's land forces are massing around the port of Tobruk with little or no harassment from the air. British bombers are said to have carried on large-scale day and night attacks in Benina, large air supply base outside Benghazi, 280 miles west of the Egyptian frontier. A large number of aircraft on the ground at Benina were reported to have been set afire or destroyed. From Benghazi eastward to Bardia and south 150 miles to the oasis of Diyarbakir, the British claimed air domination. It is only a question of time, they said, until Diyarbakir falls. They added that it has escaped bombing by the RAF in deference to the Senussi sect of Muslims whose sacred relics are there. To date, the British claim they have destroyed 560 Italian aircraft in Africa against a loss of fewer than 100. British forces, in collaboration with those of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, continued guerrilla warfare on Italian columns across the Egyptian-Sudan-Ethiopian frontier. A British patrol was reported to have routed Italians in the Metemma area east of Galabat. Berlin, January 13th. British raiders bombed Bayreuth, scene of the annual Wagner Music Festival, and other unspecified places early today in southern Germany. The Nazi Air Force carried out overnight fire-setting raids on London and the English South Coast, the High Command reported. Today's communique said only that the British dropped some bombs, but authoritative quarters said the damage they did was minor. The Bayreuth Festival House and the villa where composer Richard Wagner is buried were said to have been untouched. London, January 14th. The German Air Force concentrated a major assault on a southwest coastal town last night and early today, unleashing high explosive bombs and dropping thousands of incendiaries. 3 towns in South Wales, another in West England, and the Liverpool area also were attacked. Icy weather, which had gripped the Dover Strait since Christmas, broke last night, but a dense mist over the calm sea dimmed the brilliance of a full moon. London, the objective of a smashing fire raid Sunday night, was free of alarm long past midnight, and all England had a quiet day yesterday during daylight hours. The first bodies were brought out yesterday from the ruins of a London subway crossing hit by a German bomb Saturday night. Workers still probed the ruins for additional possible victims, and cranes swung tons of debris from the gaping crater. The British air offensive by day and night aimed at the Axis partners' shipping and oil resources and at German troops in trenches across the English Channel as well was reported yesterday by the Air Ministry. The daylight attack on Sunday on troops entrenched near the beach was the 4th in succession by British bombers and fighter planes, and it was coupled with night bombing forays on the harbors of Brest, Le Havre, and Lorient, and the reported firing of oil storage and processing plants at Porta Marghera, Italy, near Venice, Regensburg, Germany, and Ostend in German-occupied Belgium. Regensburg, a Danubian port where oil from Romania is refined and stored, was attacked for the second time. Returning pilots said bombs collapsed the boiler house of one factory and set off flames. Sea-level attacks on Nazi naval forces, an Air Ministry news service statement said, swept the decks of 2 torpedo boats 800 miles off the French coast, a large schooner, and other small vessels. Berlin, January 13th. Catholic priests in Western Germany have submitted a list of church property destroyed by British bombers to the presidency of the German Episcopate, it was reported today. The damage inflicted in 1940 was estimated at many hundreds of thousands of marks, not including the value of historical pictures and other objects which cannot be estimated, it was said. Vichy, France, January 13th. French public opinion is beginning to react strongly to the British blockade, with winter making the plight of the country more desperate. The question is being raised whether the blockade is not defeating its own purpose and driving the European continental nations into closer collaboration and anarchy. The blockade, it was said by diplomats, may turn attention here more and more toward Russia and the possibility of getting supplies from there. Bitterness is particularly centered on Prime Minister Winston Churchill as the author of the blockade, and he is now outspokenly called France's famisher. These considerations are dealt with today by Lucien Ramier in Figaro. In an article entitled Reflections on Blockade, he says it is doubtful if a blockade is an effective weapon of war and declares military decisions never are reached by inflicting suffering on civilians, but only by successes of armed forces in the field. For 8 months, we conducted a war almost without diminution of comforts, and yet were defeated, he says. Blockades against non-combatant populations, include Ramier, are more often more cruel than efficacious and more often more cruel than proper military blockades. Montevideo, Uruguay, January 13th. The 8,000-ton French freighter Mendoza was reported steaming back to Montevideo tonight from an apparently frustrated second attempt to run home through the British Atlantic blockade. A report from Punta del Este, 100 miles east of Montevideo, said the Mendoza was seen returning to this port after she had put out from Maldonado Bay about noon today. The vessel had not arrived in port tonight. The British auxiliary cruiser Asturias, whose challenge of the Mendoza last night drove it back, had been reported lying outside the mouth of the River Plate, ready to give pursuit again. The Mendoza first left here last night with a cargo of chilled beef, canned meat, and wool. Uruguayan Foreign Minister Alberto Guani was reported to have protested the halting of the ship within the Pan-American neutrality zone. Guani himself said he was waiting to determine where the interception occurred. British officials said the Mendoza's representatives had not asked for a Navicert, the naval certificate which would let her pass the blockade. They added that if the Mendoza had succeeded in cracking the blockade, 4 other French merchantmen now at Buenos Aires would have been ordered out in an effort to duplicate the feat. Washington, D.C., January 13th. One of the largest lump transfers of American property in history was indicated today in an announcement by Henry Morgenthau Jr., Secretary of the Treasury, that American investment trusts were negotiating for the purchase of the United Kingdom's direct investments in the United States. A few minutes before making the disclosure at a press conference, the Secretary said Sir Frederick Phillips, Undersecretary of the British Treasury, informed me that they, meaning the British government, are ready to do business. Proceeds of the sales, the Secretary said, will be used to pay for war purchases before President Roosevelt's lease lending plan takes effect. London, January 13th. A belief that the British government soon will make a statement of its war and peace aims was expressed by D.M. Foote, Member of Parliament and Undersecretary of the Ministry of Economic Warfare, as he addressed the Scottish Liberal Club in Edinburgh today. In the last war, a statement of that kind was not made until January 1918, he said. We shall not wait 3 or 4 years in this war before making a declaration. What matters is not so much the particular shape of the frontiers after the war as the actual issues involved in the war. Foote's statement regarding frontiers gives the first indication of how Britain hopes to reconcile its original war declaration, which was restoration of Poland to its pre-war stature. This obviously cannot be done now without war against Russia. Opinion here is inclined to believe that one of the major points which Harry Hopkins, President Roosevelt's personal representative in England, hopes to obtain is a clear-cut idea of what the British New Order will be like and how, with or without American help, it can be permanently enforced in Europe. Hopkins was received by King George VI, but as usual, refused to discuss what was said during the royal audience, which lasted more than a half hour. One of the problems between the United States and Britain undoubtedly will be to reconcile the great divergence of requirements of both countries due to their dissimilar economic positions. Trade rivalry, it is hoped here, might be solved by quota methods, but even this raises a fine distinction between the needs of a country normally importing 2/3 of the food consumed against those of America producing surpluses. Recently, a high government authority, in describing to the Tribune the vast possibilities of Anglo-American cooperation to control world output and prices of basic commodities, admitted that one problem which would have to be ironed out would be the extent to which private enterprise would be permitted to profit from such consortium if only the governments themselves were able to finance it. Ankara, Turkey, January 13th. Turkey's official radio and press today accepted a statement by the Bulgarian Premier Bogdan Filov that his people desire to remain neutral as proof that the premier has not committed Bulgaria to a pro-Nazi policy in the Balkans. Filov's speech was hailed by the semi-official Turkish party organ Ulus as drawing the line between the Balkans and war. The official radio said that at least for the present, there will be no change in Bulgarian foreign policy. In Budapest, Hungary, radio in a broadcast heard by NBC in New York last night said the Turkish Foreign Minister Sakru Sarakoglu had a very long and significant conference yesterday with the German ambassador Franz von Papen at Ankara. The Russian press was quoted by the radio to show that the new German-Russian trade pact had no political significance. German leaders only wish to assure the German public there will be no repetition of the 1914 blockade terror, the radio added, and hope the pact will be accepted by their people as an answer to American announcements on aiding Britain. Staff officers of Britain's Middle East Command have arrived here for 2 days of military discussions that will begin tomorrow. Observers said the discussions might affect the course of the war in the Mediterranean, the Balkans, and Africa. Turkey wants to regain the Deccanese Islands, which Italy holds in the eastern Mediterranean, and has manifested great interest in Greek and British successes over Italy in the Mediterranean area, as well as promised United States aid to Britain. Sofia, Bulgaria, January 13th. Germany renewed diplomatic activity here tonight amid indications of a stronger Russian stand against possible transit of German troops through Bulgaria for an attack on Greece or Turkey. The German minister Baron Herbert von Richthofen called on Premier Bogdan Filof and Foreign Minister Ivan Popov in conferences considered important in the wake of a denial by TASS, official Russian news agency, that Russia had given consent to German entry into Bulgaria. German circles hinted that Filof and Richthofen might shortly go to Berlin together. Ottawa, Ontario, January 13th. Colonel Henry Bankhead, commercial attaché to the American legation, told a Rotary Club meeting today that Great Britain will get everything she needs from the United States, including the kitchen sink. Some time ago, I forecast the United States would go to the aid of Britain, he said. At that time, the odds were 60-40. Soon the odds will have disappeared and the United Kingdom will have everything within reasonable exceptions we can give. London, January 13th. A Reuters British news agency dispatched from Khartoum, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, today quoted Haile Selassie as saying the time is not far distant when he would lead an army of Ethiopian patriots against the Italians who drove him from his throne. He declared he was pleased with the progress of training of his army and added that revolt among his tribesmen was making great headway. The days of my former Italian ally who betrayed my country are numbered, he was quoted as saying. They built fine roads, but killed and enslaved thousands of my people, although they failed to break their spirit. I look forward to the liberation of Ethiopia and the establishment of a just and constitutional government. He said royal war drums were beating nightly, and hundreds of my former soldiers, now forced to fight for the Italians, understand the message of the drums and are now deserting and rallying to the standard raised at Gojam by the faithful commander Ras Mangasha. The belief grew among observers that Britain may soon attempt a major drive against Italian forces in Ethiopia with the aid of native rebellions. An Italian defeat in East Africa appears so highly probable that only the British government is ready not only to grant safe conduct but facilities for the removal of women and children from Italian possessions, the authoritative British Press Association said. If Rome accepts, the British propose that these non-combatants should travel to Italy by way of Djibouti, French Somaliland, or from ports in Italian Somaliland and Eritrea, the agency said. The British Middle East Command, in a communique issued at Cairo last week, told of an uprising of Ethiopian patriots encouraged by support from the Royal Air Force, compelling an Italian garrison to flee the post of Guba, 20 miles from the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan frontier. At the same time, the fascist forces were reported to have withdrawn from another frontier post north of Kassala near the Eritrean border. Helsingfors, Finland, January 13th. Famine is fast approaching in Finland unless Finland can obtain the necessary credit in the United States to purchase foodstuffs and Navicure's from Great Britain, certificates of prior inspection, to enable Finnish ships to bring cargoes to Petsamo. Half of Finland's population will be without bread by next May, Minister of Supplies Väinö Katalainen said today. He told the Tribune that Finland's situation is serious. Finland, he said, has been negotiating since last November with the American Surplus Marketing Administration in Washington, D.C. for a credit of $7 million to buy American farm products. Finland wanted to buy 4,000 tons of margarine fats, 7,000 tons of lard, 4,000 tons of pork fatbacks, 25,000 tons of wheat, 10,000 tons of wheat flour, 10,000 tons of oil cakes, and 9,000 tons of cotton. Rome, January 13th. After 2 months of trying to hold off Greek attacks, General Ubaldo Sadu relinquished command of Italian forces in Albania today to General Ugo Cavallero, Premier Mussolini's current number one military chieftain in the Third Army shakeup since November 10th. An official announcement said General Sodu, 57 years old, veteran of every one of Italy's wars since 1911, Duce's Undersecretary of War when he was sent to and Il Duce's Undersecretary of War when he was sent to Albania, has been relieved because of his health. Italian authorities insisted that the situation behind the lines in Albania was satisfactory. General Cavallero, himself a veteran of 3 wars, retains his position as Chief of Staff, a post in which he succeeds Marshal Pietro Badoglio, who resigned at his own request in a high command shakeup on December 6th. This latest overhauling of the Albanian command came as Italy created the new German-Italian air offensive in the Mediterranean with the 9th bomb or torpedo hit on British warships within 4 days. Today's war bulletin said an Italian plane had torpedoed a big enemy ship in the eastern Mediterranean. This brought the number of British men of war listed as bombed or torpedoed since last Friday. At least one of them, a cruiser, was declared to have been left in a sinking condition. One of the others torpedoed was identified as a battleship of the 31,000 Malaya class. The Axis air offensive is aimed at closing the Mediterranean to the British at sea's middle, where British convoys pass through the Straits of Sicily. The possibility of the Axis powers enlarging that threat by gaining air bases in French-owned Corsica and Tunisia is envisioned in some foreign circles. Tunisia is on the coast of Africa opposite Sicily, and the island of Corsica is off the Italian west coast. Although nothing has developed in Axis quarters to indicate such a move, some observers regard it as a logical maneuver. Since long before the war started, Italy has claimed rights in both Corsica and Tunisia. With British forces widely dispersed in Africa, aiding Greece and obliged to reassure Turkey, some quarters expressed the belief that occupation of Tunisia might prove as easy for the Axis as Tangier did for Spain. Diplomatic negotiations with the French presumably would have to be carried out by the Germans. As for the possibility of resistance by General Maxime Weygand, commander of the French forces in Africa, the Axis powers have indicated their readiness to meet any situation raised there by his forces. The Stefani, Italian news agency correspondent on the Albanian front, reported intense activity of patrols along the entire front. He reported attacks and counterattacks upon local objectives in some sectors by both the Greeks and Italians. Military activity on Italy's land fronts have summed up briefly by the day's communique, which told of continued artillery activity around besieged Tobruk in Libya. It acknowledged British air raids last night on Turin, Venice, and Catania. One person was killed and several were injured at Venice, and some damage was reported at all 3 places. 2 British raiders were reported downed over Catania and Venice. London, January 13th. The government today fixed the prices of marmalade and canned fish at those prevailing on December 2nd, 1940. The Hague, the Netherlands, via Berlin, January 14th. All Jews must register within 6 weeks in an official list of populations under a decree issued today by the German Commissioner for the Netherlands. Persons having only one Jewish grandparent will be classified as Jews, the decree held, and a grandparent who belonged to a Jewish congregation will be regarded as a full-blooded Jew. Mexico City, January 13th. Effective today, all light and power service in Mexico City and the Federal District will be cut off between 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. daily, and all stores, business houses, and factories will be required to close at sundown. The orders, dictated by the Ministry of National Economy after a survey of the district's water resources for power production, indicated the capital might suffer a total blackout unless electric consumption were reduced, brought many protests. As unusually light rainy an unusually light rainy season and overtaxing of power facilities were responsible for the shortage. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, January 13th. Two members of a Brazilian commission marking the frontier with Venezuela were killed when their party was surrounded by Indians in the upper Amazon jungles, it became known here today. About 100 Indians attacked the camp, shooting poisoned arrows that wounded several persons. Rifle fire forced the Indians to retreat, but they encircled the camp. A call for help was sent out on the party's portable wireless. Troops and medicine were rushed to the camp by planes. Quito, Ecuador, January 13th. Many arrests were made today, and strong forces of military police were held in readiness for new outbreaks following a bloody clash in which 2 rioters were shot dead, 17 others wounded, and 13 policemen hurt. Authorities blame communist agents for the disorders, which started with a demonstration through the capital streets and ended in the stoning of the presidential palace yesterday. The attack was dispersed by a tear gas barrage and gunfire. Among those arrested were Bolivar Leon and Walter Andrade, socialist leaders, and Moises Bautista, Arturo Cardenas, Vidal Torres, Daniel Alcocar, Carlos Corraz, and Manuel Cazares, described by police as extreme leftists. For 3 hours, demonstrators paraded to demand the freedom of Ecuadorian army flyers imprisoned on charges of complicity in an abortive revolution on January 12, 1940, on behalf of Velasco Ibarra, defeated presidential candidate in last year's election. President Carlos Arroyo del Rio was unhurt, although rooms of his palace were showered with fragments of glass from smashed windows. The demonstration broke out as this little South American country, the southernmost of those to whom the United States looks for help in protecting the Panama Canal, began calling up reservists for training. And now back to national news. Washington, D.C., January 13th. Senate non-interventionists expressed hope today that 2 Roosevelt ambassadors soon would be free of the diplomatic muzzles, which have enjoined their silence on the European war and the part this country should take therein since the presidential election last November. Although Joseph P. Kennedy, ambassador to England, submitted his resignation last November 6th and John Cudahy, ambassador to Belgium, resigned on November 28th, President Roosevelt kept diplomatic gags upon them by deferring acceptance of their resignations. Cudahy's resignation was accepted on December 30th, but the effective date is January 17th, which is next Friday. Acceptance of Kennedy's resignation was made contingent upon the appointment of his successor, who thus far has not been named. His friends, however, assert that he is champing at the bit, yearning to tell what a disaster it would be for this country to enter the European war. The Senate non-interventionists are convinced that the dispatch of Harry L. Hopkins to London as Mr. Roosevelt's private emissary, or Colonel House, was concerned in some way with the efforts to keep Kennedy's mouth closed. They believe that Hopkins was sent on his unofficial mission either to obviate the immediate necessity of appointing an ambassador, which would unmuzzle Kennedy, or to gather from British sources information to be used against Kennedy if he should break his silence. The administration is believed to be especially anxious to keep Kennedy quiet until Congress has disposed of Mr. Roosevelt's War Powers Bill. The non-interventionists, on the other hand, are determined to get him before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee if possible while the bill is under consideration. Kennedy was an administration hero last October when he returned from London to his home in Boston, Massachusetts, and made a campaign speech for Mr. Roosevelt professing the solemn conviction that the president, if reelected, would keep the country out of war. On October 30th, Mr. Roosevelt fulsomely acknowledged his gratitude for the speech of my ambassador and made another pledge to you mothers and fathers, your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign war. Since the election, however, the administration propagandists have waged a concerted smear campaign to destroy Kennedy in the popular esteem. Not even Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh has sustained a greater barrage of vilification. Among the milder epithets hurled at him are appeaser, pro-Nazi, anti-Semitic, and defeatist. Kennedy has reiterated his belief that the United States should stay out of the European war. His views on such questions as the desirability of a negotiated peace, which side is likely to win if it is fought to the finish, and what the consequences will be in England regardless of the military decision, have been expressed only in private conversations, with the exception of an interview which he later repudiated. The Boston Globe on November 9th quoted him as saying in an interview that democracy is finished in England. Ambassador Cudahy's experience has been even more mysterious in some respects than Kennedy's. In August 1940, he was rebuked by the State Department and ordered home after British and American newspapers quoted him as saying in a London interview that 8 million people in Belgium would face starvation unless Britain should relax the blockade and permit the entry of food from the United States. Cudahy also defended the surrender of the Belgian army by King Leopold and commended the conduct of the German soldiers in Belgium. New York, January 13th. Vern Marshall, chairman of the No Foreign War Committee, was subpoenaed today to appear in Washington tomorrow before the federal grand jury investigating campaign expenses. In disclosing here that he had been subpoenaed, Marshall said he did not know why, but assumed it was because he was the committee chairman. It should be emphasized once more, he said, that the purpose of the No Foreign War Committee is to prevent the United States from being dragged into Europe's endless economic war, which has nothing whatever to do with the ideals of true democracy, and to prevent the lending, leasing, or giving away of our national defenses, so long as the president continues to warn us of the imminent peril of aggression upon us. Washington, D.C., January 13th. Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, wrote Paramount News today that the propaganda for war that is being waged by the motion picture companies might make necessary some legislative restriction unless the industry itself displays a more impartial attitude. The senator sent a copy of the letter to Will Hayes, who supervises the motion picture industry. Wheeler told a press conference that the motion picture industry is doing a terrific job of war propaganda and added that he had information that the administration is encouraging propaganda pictures. Mr. Roosevelt, Wheeler said, is using every agency at his command in trying to whip up the emotions of the people and make them war-minded. The text of Wheeler's letter follows. Will you kindly inform me when, if at all, you intend to carry my answer to the President's most recent fireside chat? And what, if anything, you are going to do about carrying both sides of the controversy on pending legislation which directly involves the question of war or peace? This question is so important that I believe the people should insist not only on equal radio coverage for both sides of this highly controversial question, but that the newspapers and the motion picture should do the same. The propaganda for war that is being waged by the motion picture companies of this country is reaching a point at which I believe legislation will have to be enacted regulating the industry in this respect unless the industry itself displays a more impartial attitude. Many complaints are coming to me and to other members of Congress to the effect that the motion picture industry is carrying on a violent propaganda campaign intending to incite the American people to the point where they will become involved in this war. As you well know, the motion picture and newsreel is one of the great agencies for molding public opinion of this country, and if we are going to preserve this nation as a democratic republic, it is highly essential that both sides of each question be presented. I sincerely hope that you will call this to the attention of your people, as I am fast coming to the conclusion that legislation should be enacted to remedy the present situation. Washington, D.C., January 13th. Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, said tonight that Wendell L. Willkie is just as war-minded as President Roosevelt, and then suggested that the chief executive appoint him Secretary of State or Ambassador to Great Britain, so we will have a completely war-minded administration. Wheeler referred to Willkie's statement endorsing generally the administration's aid to Britain legislation. New York, January 13th. Wendell L. Willkie's tentative plans for his trip to England within the next fortnight provide for 2 traveling companions, it was reported today. The State Department is understood to have approved passports for them. The 2 are John Coles, Des Moines, and Minneapolis publisher, and Langdon K. Thorne, sportsman and director of several corporations. The defeated Republican presidential candidate announced plans for first-hand observations in England yesterday in supporting the dictatorial Lend-Lease bill with certain modifications. Washington, D.C., January 13th. Airplane manufacturers told the House Naval Affairs Committee today that they know of no additional authority which President Roosevelt needs to increase aid to Great Britain so far as the production of fighting aircrafts concerned. Plane factories are expanding as rapidly as possible and are sending most of their output to the British at present, the committee was told. Moreover, Burdett Wright, Vice President and General Manager of the Curtiss Airplane Division, Curtiss-Wright Corporation, asserted that mass production of airplanes in this country cannot be obtained until types are standardized. And standardization does not appear to be imminent, he declared. The committee, headed by Representative Carl Vinson, Democrat Georgia, is inquiring into the causes of the bogged-down defense program. It has been told that government red tape resulting in long delays in the actual awarding of contracts, the tardy expansion of plane factories, and a shortage of skilled labor and machine tools are among the causes responsible. Asked when a real expansion of the aircraft industry would be affected, Wright estimated that it would be 6 to 9 months before actual production of planes would be stepped up. His own plant, now turning out the equivalent of 8 Pursuit planes a day, will be on a 40 planes a day basis by July, he said. L.R. Grumman of the Grumman Aircraft and Engineering Corporation was asked whether he knew of any action Congress might take to speed the production in his plant. He said he had no recommendations. He was then asked by Representative James W. Mott, Republican Oregon, whether the president needs any additional grant of authority to increase the number of planes his company would be able to send to Britain. The witness replied that his plant at Bethpage, New York, soon will reach a production of 40 fighters a month for the United States Navy, and that this is the maximum for which the Navy would be able to supply engines during the next 18 months. The differences between this figure and the maximum production of his plant, Grumman said, would be taken up by planes for Britain, for which the British are able to supply American engines. He said his company recently completed one order for Britain and is negotiating a new one. Grumman said his company would complete a $3,500,000 plant expansion in March for the production of 286 United States torpedo bombers, for which the design has not been completed. It is now completing an order of 55 aircraft carrier fighters for the Navy and will start on a new order of 497 immediately. All the planes now being delivered, he said, embody improvements ordered by the Navy after air observers had returned from Britain. Wright said his company has Navy contracts for 300 Scout observation planes and 678 Scout bombers. Plant expansions in Buffalo, Columbus, Ohio, and St. Louis will cost $24,100,000. It will be next December before his company will begin deliveries to the Navy because the contracts were not awarded until last December. A 6-month delay was caused, he said, by the Navy's decision to order a new type of plane. Commenting on the admitted lack of skilled labor in the aircraft industry, Chairman Vinson asserted that production in non-military industries must be cut down in order that the labor may be made available for military items. He indicated the committee would also recommend a government survey to determine the number of skilled laborers in non-military industries who could be drafted by the aircraft industry. Representative Melvin J. Moss, Republican Minnesota, proposed creation of a director of aircraft production with powers approaching those of the British plane production chief, Lord Beaverbrook. A survey of the aircraft industry, Moss said, showed the one thing above all others which has caused great confusion is the number of government agencies handling aircraft procurement. There should be one man in authority at the top. Panama City, Panama, January 13th. United States military personnel in the Panama Canal Zone was instructed today to avoid giving information to visitors from the United States which might be used for unfavorable public statements by the visitors on their return home. An announcement from the office of Lieutenant General Daniel Van Voorhis, commander of the Canal Zone Department, disclosed that he recently wrote the War Department concerning publication of unfavorable military and political information relating to this department and the Republic of Panama. It added, "We should be ever mindful that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, that flippant and hasty remarks may be taken seriously and may result in the wrong interpretation by the listener and in unfavorable publicity. Only general officers authorized by department headquarters will be permitted to answer questions concerning types of material and the amount and quality of ammunition in the Canal Zone." Washington, D.C., January 13th. Dr. William M. Leeserson of the Labor Board proposed today that instead of imposing no strike legislation on the defense industries, the government call labor and management together to consider adopting mediation machinery similar to that of the Railway Labor Act. Lieberson suggested that the plan might serve as the basis for voluntary cooperation in handling disputes in defense industries. Lieberman, in expressing his opposition to anti-strike legislation in an interview, said, "No strike laws do not prevent strikes. They only make them illegal, and that does not help defense." Washington, D.C., January 13th. The Supreme Court today upheld the constitutionality of the Sweeping Espionage Act of 1917, which makes it a crime to obtain or transmit any information respecting the national defense to be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of any foreign nation, friend, or foe. Two men convicted in California of violating the act in 1938 by furnishing to Russia naval intelligence reports which they deemed innocuous contended that the statute was so broad that it might even proscribe the publication of crop reports by newspapers if a jury held that such information was connected with national defense. The court said, however, that the provisions of the act were not simple prohibitions against obtaining or delivering to foreign powers information which a jury may consider relating to national defense. In that case, it added, the law might be invalid. But we find no uncertainty in this statute, the decision continued, which deprives a person of the ability to predetermine whether a contemplated action is criminal. The obvious delimiting words in the statute are those requiring intent or reason to believe that the information to be obtained is to be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of any foreign nation. This requires those prosecuted to have acted in bad faith. When there is no occasion for secrecy, as with reports relating to national defense published by authority of Congress or the military departments, there can, of course, in all likelihood, be no reasonable intent to give an advantage to a foreign government. West Palm Beach, Florida, January 13th. Coast Guardsmen working in a moderately high sea removed the last of 200 passengers from the grounded luxury liner Manhattan tonight and brought them safely ashore. The crew of 556 remained aboard. The nearest thing to a mishap ended happily when guardsmen grabbed a woman who nearly fell overboard while being lowered to a surfboat. Plans were made to have the tug Willet using kedge anchors to take advantage of swells lifting the ship attempt early tomorrow to pull the 24,000-ton Manhattan free. The Coast Guard cutters Vigilante and Mojave tugged for several hours today in a futile attempt to free the steamship. The passengers were taken off 20 at a time in a Coast Guard surfboat and transferred to the Vigilante for conveyance to the Palm Beach Inlet dock. Washington, D.C., January 13th. The Justice Department said today that immigration agents had served a deportation warrant on Princess Stephanie Hohenlohe Waldenberg in Palo Alto, California. The princess, who entered the United States on December 22, 1939, traveling on a Hungarian passport, was granted one extension on her visitor's visa, but was denied a second. She had agreed to leave last Saturday, the department said, but she notified immigration officials on January 6 that she was suffering from a nervous condition and was unable to travel. Two officers of the United States Public Health Service later certified that she was suffering from hysteria and apparently was too ill to travel. However, the Justice Department added in its announcement, the princess's own physician stated to Immigration Service officials that she was obtaining and taking sedatives which had not been prescribed, and this was largely responsible for her physical and mental condition. He indicated that she would continue in that condition so long as she continues to take sedatives. Princess Hohenlohe has been characterized in the British House of Commons and elsewhere as a Nazi sympathizer. She has denied having any part in Nazi propaganda and has retained an attorney to fight such accusations. Arrangements were made with the attorney Joseph J. Bullock of Redwood City, California, for service of the warrant, the Justice Department said, and the princess will be arraigned on Friday at the immigration station in San Francisco. Bail of $25,000 will be asked. New York, January 13th. The surpassing urgency of defense production clearly demands personal and business sacrifices, Donald M. Nelson, purchasing chief in the new Office of Production Management, said tonight. Nelson spoke at the opening of the 30th annual convention of the National Retail Dry Goods Association. He declared that the future of democratic government for perhaps hundreds of years might depend upon the degree of success attained by the Office of Production Management at Washington. We might as well decide right here and now, Nelson said, that unless every industrialist, every businessman, and every wage earner is willing to subordinate his own short-term interest to the long-term interest of all of us, then this program will fall short for the surpassing urgency referred to by the Office of Production Management clearly demands personal and business sacrifices. The requirements of military and naval equipment for ourselves and our friends were limited, Nelson said, by only the total capacity of every mine, factory, and mill in the country to produce such equipment. This is an all-out effort. And now for local and regional news. Springfield, Illinois, January 13th. Governor Dwight H. Green of Illinois tomorrow will appoint 8 of the 10 members of his cabinet and at least 2 of his personal aides. Today he described it was the biggest day in his life. It opened with his inauguration, a formal ceremony in the State Armory in which he described his hopes and plans for his 4-year administration. Taking office with the new Republican governor were these other Republicans: Hugh W. Cross, Jerseyville Lieutenant Governor; George Barrett, Chicago Attorney General; Arthur C. Lueder, Chicago Auditor of Public Accounts; and Warren Wright, Springfield Treasurer. Secretary of State Edward J. Hughes was the only Democrat. He was sworn in for his 3rd term, the only member of the Democratic administration to survive the November election. Governor Green pledged economy in all state departments, urged immediate removal of the sales tax from food, and lashed out at bosses and scandals in high places. Then came his formal entry with his family into the old executive mansion. As commander-in-chief, he met the officers of the National Guard. A huge reception at the mansion followed, and then running far into the night came the most pretentious inaugural ball in the state's history. As Governor Green left his box in the Armory, where thousands were still dancing to the music of big-name bands and want to spend his first night under the roof of the mansion, he said that he knew full well the time had come for work, hard work, and plenty of it. Green will walk into the governor's office in the Capitol building in the morning for the first time. His first job will be signing the papers necessary to send the Senate the nominations of 4 of his department heads. The same number of appointments are expected to be ready for a post-midnight session of the Senate held at that hour because it will mark the arrival of the 3rd legislative day, which will permit passage of emergency appropriation bills for relief, old age assistance, and blind pensions. These 8 appointments will include directors of the Departments of Public Works, Finance, Public Welfare, Conservation, Mines and Mining, Insurance, Agriculture, and Registration and Education. Posts now held mostly by Democrats appointed by Governor John Stell, who served since Governor Henry Horner's death last October. For the present, Governor Green will not name his directors of labor and of public health. The former post is held by Martin Durkin, a Horner appointee. It is understood Green intends to study the union situation in Illinois before selecting Durkin's successor. The Department of Health is under the direction of Dr. Roland C. Cross, a Stell appointee, and Green has not selected his successor. Springfield, Illinois, January 13th. They must have thought it a command performance, the 23,000 persons who received invitations to the governor's inaugural ball. That was the only interpretation Edwin L. Ryerson, Jr., chairman of the ball, could place on the vast crowd that filled the Armory here tonight and overflowed by the thousands to dance on the marble mosaic corridors beneath the rotunda of the State House itself. Everyone's come who's got an invitation, Mr. Ryerson observed as he gazed incredulously out over the heads of the throngs who, packed closer than any sardine that came out of a can, gazed and turned back at the stage where he, a throng of other dignitaries, Wayne King's orchestra and Eddie Duchin's orchestra, sat. As good an explanation of it as any was offered by Mrs. Richard J. Barr of Joliet, wife of the Dean of the Illinois Senate. She came on crutches, wearing beneath her turquoise crepe dinner dress a plaster cast, fashionably dressed in a zipper suede stocking which concealed a broken right leg. Someone remarked that it took courage for her to come. Courage, repeated Mrs. Barr. It could have taken courage to stay home. We don't inaugurate a Republican here every day. The governor's party was delayed some 45 minutes in its scheduled arrival at the ball by another surprise. This took place at the Executive Mansion where the governor and Mrs. Green held a reception. They expected a few hundred callers. They received uncounted thousands who lined up four abreast and hundreds deep in the mansion driveway to be admitted into the mansion in groups of 20. Adjutant General Leo M. Boyle presented each caller to the governor and Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green, smiling and vivacious, wore a bouffant white net evening dress, the bodice shimmering with gold and silver sequins. It had a deep square neck and brief cap sleeves. She wore 16-button gloves. Her flowers, white camellias and violets, because they're the state flower, she confided, were pinned to her white seed pearl bag. All state officials were in the receiving line and all were dressed to the hilt. Only two of the men dared to appear in dinner jackets and black ties. All others were in white ties and tails. Most of the women wore extremely décolleté dresses. At the ball, all accepted modes of dancing were ruled out by 10 o'clock. There was no space. One daring young thing, barely clad in pale blue taffeta, managed a hula-hula on the shoulders of four strong young men, and a few others danced in the dark recesses backstage or in the exits usually reserved for ambulance space, but no one danced on the floor. They swayed in a multitudinous gaze. 2,000 persons had seats in the balcony. Some who wisely came equipped with opera glasses were fortunate. They, for instance, could get good views of the governor's two young daughters, Nancy, who was 13 years old, and Gloria, who is 9. They wore long, pale pink dresses, clasping old-fashioned lace-edged clusters of pink carnations. The overflow dancers at the State House probably were the real winners of the evening. Not only was the music of the ball properly relayed to them by public address system, but also the marble floor had been freshly waxed. The marble corridors were interminable, and no one asked to see your invitation. You just walked in and danced. A few were there in evening dress, but the majority who danced with imagination, abandon, and vigor were young and in sweaters or short skirts. Gee, said one, why can't they do this oftener than every 4 years? What do you mean, her escort retorted. They haven't done this since Lincoln. Springfield, Illinois, January 13th. Even before John Stell had retired officially as governor of Illinois in favor of the incoming Republican Dwight H. Green, an inquiry into Stell's 100-day conduct of the state government was demanded today by a member of his own party, Representative Joseph Sam Perry, Democrat Wheaton. Perry introduced a resolution in the House calling for appointment of a committee to determine the truth or falsity of allegations he said were commonly reported. The allegations follow. Number 1, that Stell used his influence to defeat legislation for the conservation of Illinois' oil supply because of his own extensive interests in oil leases and in a refinery. Number 2, that Stell was extravagant and wasteful of taxpayers' money while filling the late Governor Henry Horner's unexpired term. And number 3, that Stell cooperated vigorously in a legislative investigation of the Horner administration, but that after Horner's code departments had been scrutinized, the inquiry was mysteriously discontinued or silenced in such a manner that none of the activities of the said John Stell have been investigated or examined. Springfield, Illinois, January 13th. Immediately after moving into his offices in the Illinois Supreme Court building this afternoon, Attorney General George F. Barrett issued a statement reaffirming his campaign pledges. The statement read, "If we are to preserve our great nation, our state, our communities, our homes, our opportunities, and those of the future of our children and of those yet to come, it is our solemn obligation as Americans to uphold the law. The notorious alliance between crime and politics no longer can be permitted to pollute the very source of representative government. Vote frauds must be made physically impossible. The vote thief must be driven from Illinois. As Attorney General, it will be my consistent policy to serve all the people of Illinois, not any select group. In this, I shall cooperate with all states' attorneys, sheriffs, and other law enforcement officers. I also wish now to call upon all civic and religious groups and all honest citizens throughout the state for their aid in my drive for clean, wholesome government in Illinois." Jefferson City, Missouri, January 13th. Republican Governor-elect Forrest G. Donnell appealed to the state Supreme Court today for a writ of mandamus to compel Morris Osborne, Speaker of the House, to issue a certificate of election which would permit him to be inaugurated. This action was taken after the Democratic-controlled legislature prevented Donnell's inauguration. Meanwhile, Governor Lloyd C. Stark, a Democrat, will remain in office. Other state officers, all Democrats, including the Lieutenant Governor-elect Frank G. Harris, were permitted to take office without question. Donnell was barred from inauguration by a joint session vote of 101 to 78 after a Democrat-controlled joint committee recommended such action. The move to keep Donnell out of office after he had defeated Lawrence McDaniel, his Democratic opponent, by 3,613 votes, according to official election returns, was started by C.M. Holland, Democratic state chairman. Holland told the legislature he had made an investigation in various parts of the state and found evidence of widespread vote frauds. More than 1,819,000 votes were cast in the election last November. The legislative resolution which barred Donnell from office today also authorizes opening of ballot boxes wherever the Democrats desire. A court decision on Donnell's petition for a writ probably will not be forthcoming for 2 weeks because of the time required for hearings, preparation of briefs, and consideration of the case by the court. Stark will stay in office under a provision of the Constitution which provides that a governor shall serve until his successor is duly elected and qualified. Governor Stark, commenting on the refusal of the legislature to seat Donnell as his successor, said, "All the able constitutional lawyers I have talked with agree that the duly elected governor should be seated as required by the Constitution, and the contest, if any, then can be carried out according to the Constitution." Donnell's petition to the Supreme Court charges that Osborne is evading his constitutional duty by refusing to accept the official election returns and declare him entitled to office. Osborne countered with a statement that Donnell's election was indicated only by the official returns and not by an official count, although he did not question the returns in the cases of members of his own party. Republicans gained 13 seats in the Missouri House and 2 seats in the Senate last November as a result of increasing rural revulsion against the Democratic political machines in Kansas City and St. Louis. The House now contains 85 Democrats and 65 Republicans. 5 Republicans and 28 Democrats have been seated in the Senate. In the joint legislative session which barred Donnell from office, 70 Republicans and 8 Democrats voted to declare him elected. 5 Democrats did not vote, and the other 101 voted against him. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 13th. The Indiana State Republican Committee late tonight voted to consider an inquiry into charges that thousands of aliens helped elect Henry F. Schricker, governor of Indiana. Schricker, who won by 3,478 votes, was inaugurated today. He was the only Democrat elected to state office in the November election. The committee met in a secret session in the Claypool Hotel and heard charges preferred by former Judge Virgil E. Whitaker of Hammond. Judge Whitaker last week presented a legislative petition asserting that Schricker was elected over his Republican opponent, Glenn R. Hillis, by fraudulent votes, including those of thousands of Lake County aliens who were not entitled to vote. Hundreds of letters, telegrams, and telephone calls, all demanding rejection of President Roosevelt's dictatorial aid to Britain bill as a threat to American democracy, poured into the offices of the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee yesterday. Mrs. Janet Ayer Fairbank, vice chairman of the Chicago chapter, termed their response more than gratifying. She said more than 2,100 protests were received yesterday, and we expect a deluge tomorrow. Extra switchboard operators will be on hand today in the chapter offices at 80 East Jackson Boulevard to receive calls from persons who want to keep the United States out of the European war. The telephone numbers are Wabash 5473, Wabash 5474, and Wabash 5475, and Wabash 5476. The names and addresses received at America First headquarters will be sent to the congressman of the district in which each person lives, attached to a protest against the bill. The immediate reaction to this measure that is almost certain to lead the United States into war proves that the great majority of the American people will make themselves heard when their liberties are threatened, Mrs. Fairbank declared. Almost everyone who calls tells us that his friends are writing or wiring their senators and congressmen. Some are asking their friends to telephone 5 others, urging protest letters and telegrams. Ms. Harriet E. Vidum, head of the Roll Call of American Women, said its 10,000 members in 42 states have been asked to send letters to their congressmen calling for the defeat of the bill. The 60,000 members of Joint Council Number 25 of the International Teamsters Union were asked to join in the protest by Leslie G. Goody, president. $4 million worth of bomb fins and practice bombs will be made in Chicago by the Ream Manufacturing Company. They are to be manufactured in a $500,000 plant, work on which will start this week. The new factory, scheduled for production of the bombs by April 1st, will add about $250 to the company's payroll, according to W.H. Innes, manager. It now employs about that number in its plant at 3425 South Kedzie Avenue. The new plant will be built on a 40-acre tract bounded by 75th Street on the north, Kedzie Avenue on the east, 77th Street on the south, and Homan Avenue on the west. Representatives of the 16,000 dairy farmers in the Chicago milk shed yesterday planned an attack on the city's council, a proposed ordinance to shift the $400,000 annual cost of dairy inspections from the taxpayers to the producers. The council will hold a public hearing on the measure tomorrow. The bill provides that for each 100 pounds of milk, 46.5 quarts produced, dairy farms would pay a fee of 1 1/4 cents. Country receiving plants 1/4 cent. The city pasteurization plants 1/2 cent. Milk companies would pay an annual fee of $5 for each truck or wagon, and independent vendors would be assessed $15 per year. Saginaw, Michigan, January 13th. 400 night shift employees of the Wilcox Rich division of the Eaton Manufacturing Company went to work at 4 p.m. today under protection of state police after a morning clash between workers and CIO pickets, which resulted in injury of 5 policemen and 2 strikers. By night, police and state troopers had arrested 20 pickets on rioting charges, and they would obtain felony warrants against every man who could be identified as having taken part in the disorder. In Lansing, Governor Maury D. Van Wagoner announced he had authorized the use of as many state troopers as necessary to protect the Saginaw plant and those who wanted to work. He also called a conference in Detroit with R.J. Thomas, president of the CIO United Auto Workers, and a spokesman for the Eaton Company. The Wilcox Rich plant is engaged in filling national defense orders for automotive valves, valve seats, and piston rings. 300 CIO auto workers walked out last November 13th over a dispute with the AFL auto workers over a closed shop contract. Hearing on a petition for a plant election was conducted 2 weeks ago after an agreement between the CIO and the Eaton Company for suspension of the strike. The company agreed to take the strikers back pending a labor board decision. Until this morning, those who cared to work were not molested. Picketing was ordered after CIO leaders charged that the company had not kept its word to reemploy all those who want out November 13th. The strike order for this morning also included the Eaton Company's Detroit plant, and several hundred employees walked out there this afternoon without disorder. Patrolman Milan V. Plavsic was the only person requiring more than first aid treatment as a result of this morning's brief scuffle. He remained in the hospital tonight for treatment of cuts on his head. In Cleveland, O.J.O. Eaton, chairman of the parent company, said the dispute was caused by factional bitterness between the CIO and AFL for control of plant employees in Saginaw. A St. Joseph County, Indiana constable and 2 companions were locked up in the county jail in South Bend last night as members of a hijacking gang who kidnapped 2 truck drivers January 4th in southeastern Indiana and stole 400 cases of whiskey valued at $5,000. The constable is Herbert W. Clements, who a year ago was accused of operating a speed trap in German Township in St. Joseph County. Held with him are Chester Manis, 23 years old, and his brother Harry, 21, who are employed as drivers in a trucking business operation by Clements. The 3 were arrested yesterday through a trap planned by Sheriff Steve Molnar of St. Joseph County and his deputies. Molnar said Clements admitted his part and named his employees as the 2 who helped him kidnap the truck drivers, Damon Coffey and Charles Moore, both of Evansville. Coffey was stopped near Versailles in Ripley County as he was driving the load of liquor up a steep hill. Moore, who was driving another truck close behind him with a load of merchandise, also was stopped. The 2 drivers were bound, blindfolded, and placed in an automobile driven by one of the hijackers. The 2 other hijackers drove off with the trucks, and the 3rd bandit followed in the car. The merchandise truck was abandoned in Osgood, 5 miles away. The liquor truck was driven to near New Carlisle, 250 miles from Versailles, and unloaded. The hijackers then locked Coffey and Moore in the back of the truck. The 2 drivers attracted the attention of another trucker who released them after Coffey poked a set of extra keys through a slit in the door of the truck. Sheriff Molnar learned that a man with a maroon-colored car, the same color as the hijacker's car, was trying to sell liquor at a low price in St. Joseph County. He obtained the license number of the car, and it was traced to Clements. Molnar and his deputies hid near Clements' home a mile east of South Bend. Early yesterday, they saw Clements and Chester Manis load several cases of liquor on a trailer and seize them while they were driving down the highway. Harry Manis was arrested as he appeared later at Clements' home. Molnar said 345 cases of the whiskey were recovered, some in Clements' home. He said the 3 would be questioned about other hijackings in Indiana. Marquette police said last night they expected to solve several West Side holdups as a result of the arrest of two parole violators. The 2 are Stanley Trinowski, 22 years old, 2632 Cermak Road, and John Ross, 22 of 2944 Michigan Avenue. Police said Trinowski was paroled last May after serving 7 years in Pontiac for robbery. Ross was paroled from Pontiac 3 months ago after serving 5 years for burglary. Both were listed as parole violators for failure to report to parole authorities. They were arrested yesterday by Sergeant Roger O'Day and his squad at Fairfield Avenue and 21st Street. Miss Lillian Lally, an English woman who recently returned to Chicago from London, was stabbed in the back last night in front of her home at 1124 Farwell Avenue. Miss Lally told police she was about to enter the vestibule of the building when an unidentified man stepped from behind the hedge, plunged a knife into her back, and fled. Her brother-in-law and her sister, Mr. and Mrs. Bernard Reagan, with whom she lives ran to her aid when they heard her scream. Reagan is an elevated company employee. Miss Lally, who is 33 years old, received first aid from Dr. W.E. Kesey, 6205 Broadway, and was removed to the Illinois Masonic Hospital. Examination showed that the weapon, a rusty pocket knife, was with a 2.5-inch blade, had penetrated a half-inch. Her fur coat is said to have saved her from a deeper wound. Miss Lally said she knows only a few people in Chicago and has had no enemies. Police cannot explain the attack. Samuel R.H. Reed, 53 years old, colored, discharged Phillips Elementary School teacher, was declared insane yesterday by a jury in Judge Joseph A. Graber's criminal court and sentenced to the Illinois Security Hospital at Menard. Reed faces a charge of statutory rape as well as charges of being the father of an illegitimate child and contributing to the delinquency of a 15-year-old colored girl. Dr. Harry R. Hoffman, head of the Cook County Behavioral Clinic, testified that Reed suffered from a brain disease induced by syphilis. The number of industrial house specialists in the country is inadequate, the third annual Congress on Industrial Health was told yesterday by Dr. C.O. Sappington of Chicago as it opened a 2-day session in the Palmer House. He added that the requirements of an industry expanding under defense needs is so great that it will probably take a whole generation to provide the necessary number of properly and adequately educated specialists after first building up the required teaching staffs. A nationwide survey showed that only 1,283 of the 120,000 physicians who answered questionnaires can be considered actually competent in the field of industrial medicine, Dr. Sappington said. Studies showing that 12 industrial workers must be kept in good health to maintain one effective combatant in the armed forces were cited by Dr. Irvin Abel, chairman of the Health and Medical Committee of the Council of National Defense and of the Committee on Medical Preparedness of the American Medical Association. And in sports, Bloomington, Indiana, January 13th. After getting away to a slow start, Indiana's National Collegiate Basketball champions hit their stride in the second half and routed Northwestern 52-32 here tonight. It was the second victory for Indiana and the second setback for Northwestern in their 2 Big Ten games. It also was the Hoosiers' 22nd consecutive triumph on their home floor. Coach Dutch Lonborg's big Wildcats set the pace midway in the first half and led by margins of from 1 to 4 points until a one-handed basket by John Logan, Indiana sophomore forward, closed the gap with a 19-19 tie as the period ended. Jay McCreary and Paul Curly Armstrong, senior forwards, led an Indiana rally in the second half, which saw the Hoosiers gradually pull away. A total of 33 fouls, 18 called on Indiana and 15 on Northwestern, slowed the tempo of the game. The Hoosiers made 20 baskets out of 63 attempts, and Northwestern connected with 10 out of 57. Indiana will take a 2-week layoff for final exams, resuming its campaign January 27th against Michigan at Ann Arbor. Madison, Wisconsin, January 13th. Wisconsin's basketball team waged an uphill fight tonight to defeat Purdue in an overtime game, 48-42. Trailing 22-17 at the half and once by 10 points in the second period, the Badgers tied the score at 33-all with 4.5 minutes of the regular game remaining. 2 more times in the struggle that followed, the score was tied before the final gun left the teams deadlocked 38-38. Baskets by Gene Englund, Johnny Coates, and Bobby Alwyn gave Wisconsin a quick lead in the overtime period before Forrest Sproul dropped in a side shot for the Boilermakers. 2 more baskets by guard Ted Strain clinched the battle for Wisconsin, although Sproul again found the range before the game ended. Champaign, Illinois, January 13th. Illinois won its second Big Ten game with a 47-41 victory over Michigan here tonight before 5,619. The Illini won without difficulty, although Jim Mandler, Wolverine center, was a thorn in their side throughout. Mandler scored 6 baskets and 2 free throws for 14 points. After the opening minutes, Illinois took the lead, holding a 24-15 margin at the end of the half. Michigan won the second half by a fast finish, 26-23. Walter Hood Evers Illinois forward, after being held to comparatively few points in his first two conference games, broke loose tonight to account for 18 points on six baskets and 6 free throws. Art Matheson, Mandler's foe under the basket, was thoroughly covered by the Wolves and scored only 3 baskets and a free throw. Columbus, Ohio, January 13th. Ohio State's basketball team won its third straight Big Ten victory tonight, defeating the University of Chicago 67-38 before 3,654. It was Chicago's first conference game. Ohio State, which had previously beaten Northwestern 46-40, has now handed the Chicago District's Big Ten teams their first defeats. Dick Fisher of Ohio State was the game's high scorer tonight with 17 points on 8 field goals and 1 free throw. Captain Joe Stamp of the Maroons was only 1 point behind Fisher, getting 4 field goals and 8 free throws. Ohio State led at the half 20-14. Ohio State meets DuQuoin Saturday night in a non-conference game. Minneapolis, Minnesota, January 13th. Minnesota and Iowa leveled off to a 500 standing in the Big Ten before 8,000 spectators tonight as the Hawkeyes surprised the Gophers with a 41-34 setback. It was the first victory for Iowa and the first defeat for Minnesota. Milt Kuhl offset the Gophers' final desperate rush by scoring 6 field goals and a free throw for 13 points. Don Chapman added 11 points to Iowa's total. After the score had been tied 4 times in the second half, Kuhl took charge. His field goal and free throw made the score 33-30, and Iowa never was behind again. 2 of the outstanding scorers of the National Basketball League will attempt to match shots tomorrow night when the Chicago Bruins oppose the Akron Goodyears in the 132nd Regiment Armory, Madison and Rockwell Streets. Ben Stephens of the Goodyears has scored 144 points in 13 games for an average of 11. Wibbs Counts of the Bruins has counted 97 in 9 contests to average 10.7 points. Each has a half interest in the league's individual scoring record of 21 points in a single game, which Stephens set earlier in the season, and Counts tied recently against the Hammond team. Counts has been laboring under difficulties due to injuries received while playing against the Firestones and Goodyears in Akron during the Christmas holiday season. Chicago's hockey fans turned from riot hunger back to hockey enthusiasm yesterday as they reflected that the Blackhawks haven't lost a game in 4 tries since Sammy Lepresti became their goalie. The new string consists of a tie with the Boston Bruins, followed by victories over the New York Rangers, Montreal Canadiens, and the Detroit Red Wings. Tonight, Paul Thompson's lads will leave for Montreal, where they will engage the Canadiens again Thursday night, then return to Chicago for a battle with the Boston Bruins Sunday night. In their next home game, next Sunday night's meeting with the Bruins, the Hawks probably will play to a near-capacity house. The boys in the counting room forecast that the new world attendance record of 19,386 probably will stand for all time. The Chicago Stadium is the biggest hall in which hockey is played, and Chicago is the best hockey town in the world. Sunday night, the place was packed to absolute capacity under a hockey setup, and several thousands were turned away. Until bigger stadiums are built and better hockey towns are developed, there simply can't be a larger crowd. So far as is known, no architects are drawing plans for a sports structure bigger than the stadium, and 19,386 paid total is expected to stand forever. The record crowd unquestionably was attributable to the smoke-up of hoodlumism as staged by manager Jack Adams and Giacomo Orlando of the Red Wings here on January 1st. The fact that Adams and Orlando discreetly refused to put on an encore Sunday night is perhaps to their credit. Anyhow, the Red Wings' next appearance at the stadium will not be until February 27th. The crowd, despite its response to the Orlando Badman build-up, seemed happy with the Hawks' victory, first in 5 games this season with the Wings. Thousands bought tickets for the impending Bruin game, though the Bostonese feature no big, bad men, much as they are capable of playing a bruising game when their tremendous scoring machine starts clicking. Those who like scoring like the Bruins. The Boston line of Milkschmidt, Porky Dumart, and Bobby Bauer last year finished in that order in the individual scoring top of the league list. And this year, Bill Cowley, another Bruin, is leading the league in individual point scoring. Goalie Paul Goodman, who lost his job after Lopresti made good while subbing following Paul's injury in a game at the stadium, left Chicago yesterday saying he was retiring from hockey. When he was paid off by Bill Tobin, president of the Hawks, he also received a goodwill bonus. The list of unsigned White Sox was shaved down to 5 names yesterday when Jim Webb, the Mississippi Skeeter, reported favorably. His signed agreement, mailed from Meridian, Mississippi, reached the desk of Vice President Harry Grabiner, leaving only Pete Appleton, Clint Brown, Larry Rosenthal, Joe Haynes, and rookie Warren Martin among those who either can't spare the time to scribble their signatures or are grief-stricken over the club's wage offer. Cub activity during the day was confined exclusively to the catching department. Al Todd, here to visit a friend, called at the club's offices, but according to general manager Tim Gallagher, there was no discussion of wages. Bob Sheffing came in from Robertson, Missouri, to furnish proof that he had recovered from a finger injury. And Clyde McCullough, who experienced a good season at Buffalo, broadcast from his Nashville home that he had rejected his contract. McCullough, who probably boosted an appraisal of himself after reading he was the prospective first stringer and that Diz Dean had been given $10,000 as spurned a $6,000 bid. He wants $7,500. Whether McCullough's protest is a new complaint or one of the 2 Gallagher found in last week's mail isn't known. However, the fact that only 9 have signed appears like evidence that the holdout fever will break out violently among Jimmy Wilson's boys within the next few days. Sheffing was ordered to report here because the club had heard through the baseball grapevine that a finger on his right hand had stiffened up as the result of being split by a foul tip last season. His demonstration of the finger wriggling satisfied the Cub bosses. One of 5 catchers on the Cub roster, Sheffing, was acquired from the Rochester club in the annual draft. Rochester has filed a claim for his return, so he will go there in the event the Cubs find they can't make use of his services. The White Sox Fat Man's Club, an exclusive organization made up of Taft Reich, Julia Solters, and Eddie Smith, will hold its first meeting here on January 30th or 31st. They were scheduled to report at Hot Springs, Arkansas, February 1st to take up their reducing exercises, but have been ordered to come here for a weighing in. Failure to include Clint Brown in the Fat Man's Club is a fairly strong hint that manager James Dyke is washed up on his one-time relief specialist. Brown's tendency to pick up poundage distressed Dykes to no end throughout last season, and more than a few harsh words were exchanged on the subject after it became evident that Brownie had lost much of his pitching skill. Berlin, January 13th. Intensive training in Germany's parachute corps has prevented Max Schmeling, former world heavyweight boxing champion, from defending his title as European champion against the Viennese Heinz Lazic. Military authorities disclosed today that Schmeling had been denied an army furlough to accept the challenge of the Viennese, whose recent victory over Prezio Merlo of Italy made it obligatory under the International Boxing Union rules for Schmeling to defend his title before January 15th. 7 young men who temporarily are without a country but have lost none of the zest for sports competition came to Chicago yesterday. The visitors, outstanding ski jumpers and members of the Norwegian unit of the Royal Air Force, now in training at Toronto, Canada, came here to complete the Nord Ski Club's 35th annual jumping tournament at Fox River Grove Sunday afternoon. All of the group learned skiing in Norway and participated in the leading contests of their homeland until the Nazi invasion. Lieutenant Stein Sem is in command of the delegation, which includes Rolf Berg, Erling Jorgensen, Einar Strand, Eric Paulset, Kar Anthonsen, and Finn Jespersen. Ann Arbor, Michigan, January 13th. Tom Harmon, Michigan's grade halfback who was voted the most valuable player in the Western Conference, will receive the Chicago Tribune Silver Football Trophy, emblematic of that honor, next Monday night, H.O. Chrysler Wolverine coach announced today. The award will be presented between the halves of the Michigan-Minnesota basketball game in the Yost Fieldhouse by Wilfred Smith, Tribune sports writer. Hartman became eligible for the Western Conference Award when he was elected Michigan's most valuable player for the second season by his teammates. He is the third Michigan man to receive the Silver Football since the award was established in 1924. In 1926, Benny Friedman was voted the most valuable football player in the conference, and in 1932, Harry Newman was honored. This is Henry Chop reporting. That is sports, and that is the news as read from the Chicago Tribune for Tuesday, January 14th, 1941. Have a swell day.